Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and in today's video, I'll be running through my team selection ahead of Game Week 27. Welcome back everyone to another video. Now, if you did enjoy today's video, as always, it would mean the world to me if you could just drop a like, and if you're new around here, do consider subscribing as well. Let's start off by talking about the recently finished double Game Week 26. It wasn't a good one for me. I went down by, I think, about 70k places overall, but truth be told, going into last night's match between Wolves and Arsenal, it looked a lot worse than it currently does. So if anything, I'm grateful for recovering a little bit of my rank, and otherwise it could have been something like a 200k red arrow. So I'm just grateful it wasn't a complete catastrophe, but getting a red arrow, and a significant one at that, on a double game week where I have used a chip, namely the triple captaincy chip, it's not good news. Now, we should probably talk about Gabriel and the 7-pointer across the 2 game weeks. That's actually the lowest score that he's picked up across 2 consecutive games all season in which he's actually started both games. So I think there is an element of misfortune to that, but at the same time, they were both away games. Brentford are a good team. They were relatively likely to score, and in a game like Wolves away from home, whilst you'd expect them to win normally, there's still always a decent chance of any team scoring. So it does feel like an opportunity missed. 7 points is, of course, lower than the total I would have been happy with going into the game week. But if I'm completely honest with myself, anything north of 10 points, I probably would have been okay with. Anything north of 15, and I would have been happy. So 7 points is about 3 or 4 points off of what I would consider to be okay. So it's a little bit behind. It's going to probably not be the most effective use of the triple captaincy chip. In fact, earlier this season, I picked up more points from a single game week from Haaland. And it does feel bad in hindsight having triple captained a defender, because they are quite reliant on getting the clean sheets. And historically, the upside is low. But I don't want to hindsight too much on that, because over the season so far, Gabriel has been averaging 5 or 6 points a match across the season. And if he continued to do that, he would have picked up 10 to 12 points, and I would have taken that. So I don't have massive regrets. But of course, having used the chip and it's been a slightly lower score than I would have liked, it does make your mind wander a little bit as to whether or not there was a more effective use later down the line. But of course, we don't have any guarantee on double game weeks outside of game week 33, in which I'm planning on bench boosting anyway. Elsewhere, it was a disaster. And that's why I've got the red arrow, because all of my other players, bar Elliot Anderson, were pretty much awful. Rice was good across the double, 14 points from him, but he had 80% effective ownership, so it didn't do me much good. Elliot Anderson, in fact, is the only player in this entire 11 who picked up a return without a double game week, that is, who actually did my rank any good. And he only picked up DEFCON, so I wouldn't even necessarily call that a return. Haaland got a goal, got brought off at half time, and because of his effective ownership at my rank, that actually did more harm than good to me. And then it was a matter of all of the players that are well owned that did really well against me. So João Pedro, the Man City defence, Semenyo, Cole Palmer to an extent as well, they all did pretty well. So it was quite a punishing game week. And I don't think the fact that I used my triple captaincy chip on Gabriel is the reason for the red arrow, but the fact that he didn't perform as expected does also compound the red arrow somewhat. So it was just a poor team performance. If you look around, the players just didn't score points. Munoz picked up over 1 XGI, didn't get anything for it. So maybe certain players are a little bit unfortunate. Thiago, for instance, had a couple of big chances against Arsenal, but otherwise there were a few poor performers in there as well. And it's a deserved red arrow, unfortunately. So 58 points, down to 336k. It's not a crisis, but it's a frustrating red arrow at this point in the season. And I've only got 1 free transfer. I do have 2.8 million in the bank. So it might be worth having a look ahead and seeing what I can do to fix the team. Okay, so putting game week 26 in our rear view mirror, let's start by having a look at my goalkeeper and my defense. Goalkeeper is simple, and it probably will be until I wildcard now in game week 32. At least that's the plan right now. Kelleher, now does come into a great run of fixtures all the way through to game week 31. Brighton at home is not one of the better fixtures in that run, but it's still a home game. It's still a decent chance of a clean sheet. I think it's about 29% with Solio right now, so the live market odds. And he's very good with the saves. He's also great with the penalty saves as well. So Kelleher can stay, no problem there. Into my back line, I am going to go ahead with starting the double Arsenal defence away at new manager Spurs. So who knows how they're going to set up. It looks likely that they'll play a back five. They'll try and keep it tight at the back and maybe spring forward on the counter-attack. And that might leave Arsenal exposed. Can I see them conceding in this game? Yeah, possibly. But I'm still going to play the odds on what are two very high upside defenders, at least in theory. And they do still have some of the best clean sheet odds out of all teams. So they've been poor recently. They are conceding goals right now, but they're still not crisis points in my team that I immediately need to sell. I will probably sell Timber as I close in on the blank game week in 31. But I think I'm going to stick with Timber and Gabriel and hope that Spurs aren't a completely changed team under Tudor and they don't have way more attacking prowess than they did previously under Frank. Daniel Munoz, I'm again really hoping that this fixture pays off. The Burnley one obviously didn't. The underlying data was good, but Wolves at home is another decent fixture. Obviously, they're bottom of the league, so it is going to be a decent fixture. And although they've got good fixtures after this one, before I get to the wild card, this is probably the last remaining money fixture where I am really hopeful of a big return. So fingers crossed on him. I do have two good bench defenders this week in Anderson and Alderete, both playing each other. And honestly, if I had more issues with my starting 11, either of them are fine to start. And I think if you've got them on in your starting 11, I would have no worries about that whatsoever. Both decent on DEFCON, Alderete with the home fixture as well, decent odds of a clean sheet, both fine, but I think they are behind the three starting defenders right now, and also probably behind my worst attacker in my front seven. Okay, so moving into the midfield, I am going with 5 in the midfield, giving me a 3-5-2 overall. I'd want to just quickly reference the players that are more obvious that we probably don't need to spend too much time on. So Bruno Fernandes, definitely in the captaincy conversation this week. We'll come on to that later, but he's a hold all the way through to the wild card for me, and probably after that as well. Everton away is a good fixture. I'm not moving him on anytime soon. And the same probably goes for Morgan Rogers. Not on the same level as Bruno Fernandes, not as many routes to points, but he has picked up the odd DEFCON. He is getting into advanced areas, and as always, he plays 90 minutes. Good fixtures between now and game week 31, and a good fixture in game week 31 in the blank itself. So I have him down as a pretty strong buy this week if you don't already own him, but I'm very happy to own him already. Now, the next 3 are the ones where things get a bit more interesting. I'll start with Enzo Fernandez because realistically, I'm not going to be moving on a player who's got Burnley at home ever. So Enzo Fernandez stays this week. I think it gets more interesting with him next week because he's probably an easier sell than someone like João Pedro or Cole Palmer, who have been racking up the points recently. Enzo, on the other hand, has been getting good data, but underperforming. And there is a narrative to suggest that maybe he does just historically underperform on his XG and he's not a great finisher. And I will take that on board. That is absolutely fair, but he's also quite a bit cheaper than those other 2 assets. And I've only got one more game week where I need to worry about it anyway. I've got that position marked down as a transfer for next week when they play Arsenal. But I'm just hoping for a bit of good fortune, a bit of variance going my way, and Enzo Fernandez could feasibly outscore Cole Palmer or João Pedro in any given week. The odds are obviously stacked towards João Pedro and Cole Palmer in any given week, but it can always swing the other way. And although the odds are against him in terms of that heads up, that 50-50, it's still possible that he does get good points this week against Burnley, which is a very good fixture. So he'll stay for one more, then I probably will move him on after that. Declan Rice is probably the player I'm most tempted to sell in my midfield this week. Number 1, because he blanks in game week 31, whereas all of the others in my midfield don't blank. So he is the player that I will eventually at least need to sell. There's no major pressing urgency to do it this week necessarily, but if I'm going to do it down the line regardless, then I might as well consider the options this week and stress test to see whether or not it's making any of those moves this week and whether that player is better in game week 27 than Declan Rice. We'll come on to that in just a moment's time. Elliot Anderson is probably the weakest one of the 5 this week. Liverpool at home for him. But with Elliot Anderson, as I always say, it doesn't really matter who he's got as an opponent because he's likely to pick up that DEFCON anyway, which gives him a 4-point floor unless he gets a yellow card. And then he could keep a clean sheet, unlikely against Liverpool, granted. And there's not a 0 chance that he gets an attacking return. He's going at about 0.2 XGI per 90. So you'd expect an attacking return 1 in every 5 game weeks. So, especially under the new manager, by the way, he could be playing in a more advanced position. He might be on more set pieces. We just don't know what will happen there. What I do know is he should be locked in for 90 minutes all the way through to when I wildcard. And every transfer that I use now on a player that isn't going to blank in game week 31 might leave me with less flexibility when we get to that game week. So I'm hesitant to remove Elliot Anderson, especially when I'm already marking down a transfer out for Enzo, who doesn't blank in game week 31. I kind of don't want to remove both of them and spend 2 transfers on players who don't blank in game week 31. So he probably stays. So out of those 5 players, even though he's probably not the worst one in the 5 this week in particular, it's Declan Rice that might be on the chopping block. Okay, so moving into my forward line, I've got Erling Haaland, who is currently flagged. I forgot to put it on here, but we'll talk about his injury status in the next section. Newcastle at home, in theory, it's not a bad fixture, especially at home at the Etihad, with Erling Haaland and Man City's tails very much up right now, considering Arsenal drop points against Wolves. They could close the gap on Arsenal, and they are in a serious title race now. I think they will potentially smell blood, and if Haaland is anywhere near fit, he will be starting, and I do back him to do pretty well against a Newcastle side that did play in the midweek. Now, granted, they absolutely demolished Karabag in the Champions League knockout round, or playoff for the knockout round, but they still played a lot of their first teamers, so they might be a bit leggy. It's possible. And Erling Haaland had a rest in the FA Cup. So we'll talk about him in a minute and whether or not he's going to be fit for the game. But if he is up there as a captaincy candidate alongside Bruno Fernandes for me. Thiago, again, a bit like Kelleher, they run into the good fixtures now. Now, arguably, if you don't have him already and you have someone like João Pedro or Ekitike, it could definitely wait a week because Brighton at home is a good fixture, but it's not a great fixture. I actually think the matchup is quite nice for Thiago and that the way that Brighton play will play into Brentford's hands and specifically Thiago's. But I don't think objectively you can say that it's a better fixture than João Pedro at home to Burnley. So I don't think that transfer needs to be made now. But certainly ahead of game week 28, that is a move that I see a lot of managers making. Nevertheless, I'm happy to own him already, and I'm just crossing my fingers that whilst or before most people have jumped onto him again, I can maybe spike 1 haul out of the Brighton game. So with that in mind, that's my 11 right now without transfers. Let's take a look at Erling Haaland's injury status and then move on to some of the moves that I am considering. Okay, so it's worth quickly addressing the latest on Erling Haaland's fitness after he was subbed off at halftime due to an issue. Pep Guardiola after the game came out and said that during game week 26. So there is currently some doubt around whether Erling Haaland's going to be okay for game week 27. He was, of course, rested or missed out, depending on how you want to frame it, in the FA Cup. I think personally it was always very unlikely he was ever going to play in that game regardless. And if you want to frame it in that way, he should be pretty well rested ahead of the run-in, ahead of game week 27. And like I mentioned, if he's anywhere near fit, they're going to want to play him considering they are in a really decent title race now. The next thing that we should probably reference, and a lot of you are on X, on Blue Sky, are tuned into these social channels, but the thing that probably makes me very confident actually that he will start ahead of game week 27 is he was pictured in full training on Wednesday. And you can already see from the picture on screen, he's not just doing some fitness work, he's actually playing with the ball. He's involved in the full training session. I think it's Bernardo Silva you can see in the background. So it looks likely that he's in full team training. And I would imagine that by the time we get to the Pep Guardiola press conference, he might be a bit coy on it, but I still think that he will give a positive update. And if he doesn't, we've always got this image to fall back on. And I think it is pretty likely he's going to be fine for this one. With that in mind, I actually think it's a decent matchup. Although he's not got the best record against Newcastle, I think the way the fixture has fallen, given that he and Man City have had a bit of a rest, Newcastle have just played in the Champions League, and Man City's tails will very much be up in the title fight. I think it all points towards Erling Haaland for me. Okay, so let's start walking through some of the different transfer combinations I'm looking at ahead of Game Week 27. Declan Rice, like I mentioned, is probably the player most likely to go in my starting 11 this week and will be sold at some point in the next few weeks at least. It's just whether or not this is the week to do so. I need to get rid of him eventually to give me a playing 11 for Game Week 31, and there are a lot of very good high upside midfielders that I like the look of, that I want to buy before Game Week 31, and Declan Rice alongside Enzo Fernandez, but both of which are positions that I want to move on to new players with in the next few game weeks. It is just whether this is the week to do so with Declan Rice in particular. Obviously not Enzo ahead of Burnley at home. So Declan Rice for me is a player that, as long as he's playing and has a fixture, he's never a bad option to have. He's not cheap, and I don't know if he's necessarily what you'd call good value for money, but value and money in the bank isn't really a worry a lot of us have right now. So I don't think you need to sell him on those grounds. It's just whether or not you think that there are other midfielders this week in particular that can significantly outscore him and then continue to do so before he gets to the blank. Because if you think that he outscores the other midfielders up until Game Week 31, well, you might as well save the transfer and just make the move closer to the blank game week. Looking at the next 4 fixtures, I don't think they're all that bad. Spurs away from home, it could be tricky. It's a North London derby. Arsenal have dropped points a couple of weeks in a row now, and Spurs might get the new manager bounce. But Declan Rice, a bit like Elliot Anderson, he's not too prone to a dip in form due to the fixtures necessarily, because he is on set pieces and he's got a good delivery from them. He does pick up DEFCON fairly regularly. And because of those two elements, even in poor fixtures, he's always got a shot at getting a few more points. So Spurs away, Chelsea at home, they're not great on the ticker, but he is a player that I wouldn't be surprised if he came out of both of those matches with 5 points, let's say, as an example. Or maybe he picks up an assist from a set piece. It's perfectly plausible. So I don't think he's a bad player to hold on to. But then when you take a look at the right-hand side of the graphic here, at some of the players that I could afford, because I do have 2.8 million in the bank, I think all of them have loads and loads of upside, plenty of attacking threats. Wirtz is very good in terms of the bonus points as well. So if he picks up any sort of attacking return, he likely also gets bonus points. Better data, better fixtures, and doesn't blank in Game Week 31. And Mbeumo's fixtures, maybe not quite on par with Liverpool's, but better data than Wirtz. A little bit more expensive, but still affordable for me. And then you've got Semenyo, who's cheaper than Wirtz and Mbeumo. In fact, only 0.4 more than Rice. And he's got bags of attacking threat. He's playing as second striker for Man City right now. And they've got good fixtures for the next 4 game weeks. The problem with Semenyo, of course, is that, like Declan Rice, he also blanks in Game Week 31. So I think if you're out there with a few free transfers spare, or not many people who already blank in Game Week 31, go and buy Semenyo. No question about it. He's a fantastic player. He's getting great minutes. Man City are scoring bags of goals and they're in a title hunt. But if you're a bit like me, and what's putting me off in particular, I've got 1 free transfer and I've got, I think, 5 and then a 6th player in GU unable to currently play in Game Week 31, which means that I really need to start prioritizing transfers towards players that do play. And I think when you weigh that in, that makes Wirtz, possibly Mbeumo as well, slightly more appealing, because although Semenyo might beat them or get very close to them in the next 4 game weeks, because it would also then probably cost me a -4 come Game Week 31 or 1 less player that week, I think that Wirtz in particular, maybe Mbeumo as well, get close enough to Semenyo that they then outweigh the potential hit that I might need to take to reverse that move down the line. That's just my team though, and I genuinely believe that Semenyo will do very well over the next few game weeks. If you've got him already, I envy you, because he will score points and he will get a few goals in the next few, I'm sure. But I also do think that Wirtz will run in pretty close, has a chance of getting the same sort of level of points over the next 4. Then maybe, because he's got that 5th game and it removes the need for an extra transfer, maybe he's the answer here. Now, what I would say is, with Rice in particular and Wirtz, if I was looking at that exact combination, I'm not so sure that's a move I need to make this week. Spurs away for Rice, 4 or 5 points from Rice, even without an attacking return, is perfectly plausible. You might get DEFCON, so therefore 4, maybe 5 points is on the cards. And of course, he does still have goal threat. He does still have assist threat. Wirtz, slightly more, but Nottingham Forest away isn't miles better than Spurs away. It is a little bit, but I don't know whether or not it's definitely worth the transfer this week, when I could just save the transfer on this particular route, give myself a bit more information, and then next week, Rice has Chelsea at home, Wirtz has West Ham at home, and that's a much bigger gap in terms of the quality of fixture, and I feel much more comfortable making the move next week. But those are the more expensive midfielders. There are also a few cheaper ones that could tempt me this week that I am very interested in. So, as I said, there are also cheaper options in the midfield that I do want to look at over the next few game weeks. The 4 that I've picked out are my 4 current favourites. That's Harry Wilson, Ryan at Bournemouth, Dango Altara at Brentford, and then his teammate Kevin Schade. Now, Schade is a bit more expensive at 6.9 million, and that 1.1 million difference over Dango, I'm not sure you're getting a lot more value for money out of that. That extra 0.06 XGI per 90, I suppose it's helpful. And if money is no issue to you and it makes no difference whatsoever to other plans you might make before wildcarding, then maybe Schade just about edges it. But if money could be an issue down the line, and there are certain routes that might require that extra 1.1 million to be used elsewhere, I don't think there's enough in it to suggest that Schade is worth the extra 1.1. So if money could be an issue, I think Dango is the route over Schade. But if money is no issue, take that 0.06 extra XGI. And I think Schade will probably remain slightly more differential because of the price. So I think I prefer him. And as I mentioned with Thiago and Kelleher earlier in the video, the fixtures are fantastic. So no hesitation about picking up another Brentford player necessarily, but it's just which one out of the 2. And I think for me right now, because I might be able to use that 1.1 million elsewhere, Altara is the way I'd lean right now. Ryan also great fixtures, arguably even better than Brentford's. But because he's a new signing, we know a little bit less about him than we do Schade or Altara or Wilson, who I'll come on to in a minute. So far, the early signs are incredibly positive, very good underlying data, playing in a very advanced area, and all signs lead to points right now. However, Bournemouth do have players coming back. Tavernier's been pictured in training. Will he take minutes off of Ryan? Will the fact that Ryan's a new signing mean that he does get integrated in more slowly over time? I know he's played 2 90s in a row, or I think 86, then 90 in a row. But one poor performance might lead to Iraola saying, you know what, let's take you out and we'll have a conversation about how to fit into the system. I'm not saying it's likely to happen, and I actually think over the next 5 game weeks, he's highly likely to continue starting, continue to get 80 minutes plus, considering how good he's looked. But there is at least the possibility of that happening. So I think with Ryan, even though the fixture this week is really good, I would prefer to see one more week worth of information on him in particular. Because again, Declan Rice away at Spurs this week isn't bad. Like, it's not so terrible that I immediately need to sell him. So I don't mind gathering a bit more information if Ryan was the way that I was currently leaning. Harry Wilson is a very good player. And he's a player that I actually do really want over the next few game weeks. A lot of managers have been selling him recently. And when you look at the underlying data, it's worse than the 3 others on this graphic. But crucially, by the time you get to, is it game week 29, I think, is West Ham at home. Then it's followed by Nottingham Forest away. And then it's Burnley at home in the blank game week. Now, I think he'll be very popular in game week 31 itself. It's just whether or not I want to jump on him early. But either way, I think I do want to pencil in a move for Harry Wilson at some point. So it's just when I want to pick him, basically. Do I want to pick him as my Rice replacement this week with decent but not great fixtures over the next 2 game weeks, or do I want to wait a couple of weeks, maybe make Enzo to Wilson as my move next week or the week beyond? So that one might wait. And I think right now the thing that's putting me off making any of these moves today is that I'm not completely confident which one I would actually prefer for the run into game week 31. Every time I think about it, I slightly change my answer. So given that I think Rice's fixture is good enough this week, and obviously I'm not selling Enzo this week anyway, again, I might just kick this one down the road 1 game week and then make a decision with a little bit more information when both Rice and Enzo Fernandez have worse fixtures and all of these players come into better fixtures as well. Maybe bar Ryan, West Ham away versus Sunderland at home, probably about the same. But Wilson, Spurs at home, better fixture than Sunderland away, I would say. Obviously open to debate, but Burnley away for Brentford is better than Brighton at home, I'd say as well. So I think it's an easier decision to go to one of them next week, and having that week extra information could prove very useful. Okay, so wrapping up with my team selection in full ahead of game week 27, the current plan is to roll the transfer. We can't do something exciting every week at the end of the day, and I do think that having 2 free transfers next week is going to be very powerful to sort out my midfield. Enzo Fernandez comes into Arsenal away, and Rice, Chelsea at home, both players that I'm willing to move on and chase the upside on to the other players I've already mentioned in the video. But I don't think any of those moves need to be made, in particular this game week. And the players that I'm most jealous of this week, Semenyo, who does have a blank coming. You've got João Pedro, who realistically, I'm not selling Haaland or Thiago for João Pedro now because I do want both of those players longer term. And then Cole Palmer, I can't get to Cole Palmer in 1 free transfer unless it's from Bruno Fernandes, and I'm not doing that. So the players that I'm most jealous of are not easily accessible to me. Maybe bar Semenyo, but it just gives me an extra problem down the line, as I discussed earlier on in the video. So I don't see any pressing issue as to where I would definitely need to use a transfer this week. So 2 free transfers next week gives me a little bit more flexibility, and I can make some more powerful, higher upside moves when some of the midfielders that I'm already eyeing up come into better fixtures as well. And of course, as always, that little bit extra information could prove very useful. So 2.8 million in the bank. I'm going to store it for this week, give myself 2 free transfers for next week, and go on the attack in game week 28 when there are better fixtures to attack. I think in terms of the captaincy conversation, I am going to go with Erling Haaland. I'm pretty confident that he starts against Newcastle. Being pictured in full training seems like a dead giveaway to me. I could be wrong, but if I am, I think it's unlikely that he gets any minutes, and therefore Bruno Fernandes will stand in as my vice captain, and I'm perfectly happy with that as well. But I don't have too many hesitations about my 11 this week. My bench is looking relatively strong as well. Anderson and Alderete, if there is any issue in my starting 11, they can just come on in. I would be interested to know if anyone out there thinks that maybe I should start the other Anderson over Elliot Anderson, or Alderete over him as well. Maybe you even think that I should bench one of the Arsenal defenders for one of them. I personally think that this is the way that I'm going to leave it. I think Elliot Anderson just gives you almost a guarantee of 4 points, whereas the other 2 currently on my bench are not quite so locked in. And the more goals that they concede, the minus points start rolling in. Whereas with Elliot Anderson, that's not an issue. So I think I'm going to leave it as is. Let me know what you think of my team, but also how you're doing ahead of game week 27. If you've got any major questions that I can help out with, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Leave a like if you've enjoyed the video, and hit subscribe if you're new around here as well. And good luck, as always, in game week 27.